All right, good morning, guys, or in the East Coast, good afternoon. So, it's your boy Kevin with another Canine Freedom Dog Talk, and today I've got Tyler Muto, I really look up to. I really love his content, and first time I met him was in conference, and I kind of had a big like a celebrity star moment, when I got to meet him, and yeah, so I'm really excited for this talk. And um, Tyler, if you could do like a quick intro about where you're at, what you do, any specialties, and after that, we can just go on for our topic from here.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a dog trainer. These days, I'm more of a um, coach of other dog trainers. So that's primarily what I do these days. I um, run my website, Consider the Dog, which is a membership-based website that's generally geared for anybody in the dog population, so dog owners, and then we have a lot of dog trainers that are members as well. But it's a video-based website where we have a lot of educational content on dog behavior and dog training. But I also do a lot of coaching and mentoring of other professional trainers. So I spend a good part of my day talking to other dog trainers and helping them with everything from sharpening their skills with dogs, sharpening their skills with how to run their programs or how to coach and teach their clients, and also business growth and marketing or expansion and all those kinds of things because I've done all of that. I ran a very busy training center for over a decade. I was the president for the International Association of Canine Professionals and served on the board for many years. So I have a pretty broad um, experience within the industry and have a pretty diverse skill set and knowledge base when it comes to helping professional dog trainers be successful. So I think I'm a little bit uniquely positioned in that regard to help to coach and mentor professional dog trainers.
Yeah, no, like me watching your content for a while now, and listening how you talk about dogs, and like just watching you work with, especially like your recent series with Olaf the German Shepherd. It's really
Mhm.
insightful, and yeah, even just like recently, like I think like last year, I finished Gold School with Napopo with Bart Balone, and I know Bart was one of your mentors too, right?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, so it was really cool just learning from Bart. It was definitely a really eye opener experience when I
Yeah, he is
practiced.
a very unique guy and definitely somebody worth spending time with if you have the opportunity for sure.
Bart, just to tell you, because I Bart gave me so many different names. Like there was like one time during dinner time where like I was eating like dinner that they prepped, and Bart just comes up to me, says like, "You eat like a chicken," and just walks away, and I'm just like,
It
"What?"
sounds like Bart. Yeah, it sounds like Bart.
it's he definitely gave me a very fun experience over there. But uh anywho, yeah, so for this topic, like how I was talking to Tyler like through the messages, was trying to just go in depth or just explain like that's like, as we all know, not all dogs like fit in one method, or like, there's no like one size fit all. And I feel like between like working dog trainers with how they raise dogs versus like when you have pet dog owners or pet trainers, I think there's exceptions, or like how we like to explain, like it depends on the dog that you're working with that's right in front of you. So like Tyler, one of the big things, like, between like when a working dog trainer like has, they're raising a puppy, right, and they're trying to train it for like sports, or like they're trying to train it for like the high drive, anything like high drive, how they raise a dog versus like when like a a normal pet owner, or like a or even just like a pet dog trainer, like how they raise a dog, how it's like how they're trained to just be calm, or they trained to be like just like a normal pet in some way. Like, do you kind of see like the difference and like has to like this question, I didn't think this question through.
I think I know what you're getting at.
Yeah.
So I think what I'd like to kind of start off by saying is, like you mentioned, sort of the quintessentially annoying dog trainer answer to almost any question is it depends on the dog, and that's something that I think all of us dog trainers kind of know and agree on, right? Is that different dogs will sort of require or dictate different approaches to things. But I think, especially this past year, where I've really been kind of more devoting myself full time to coaching other professional dog trainers and helping them with their clients, I think one sort of thing that doesn't really get brought up enough is not just that it depends on the dog, but it depends on the human. And it depends on what that human needs from their dog, what the relationship dictates, what the lifestyle dictates. So it's not even just like, obviously some dogs will respond better to one particular training method versus another. But I think aside from methodology, there's a million and one ways to train a dog to sit, for instance. From a professional standpoint, there's sort of a process component of this. Like, how do we think about planning our training program, like start to finish? So if we're doing a board and train, like how are we going to map out like what we're going to do with the dog over 4 weeks, or if it's private lessons over 5 lessons or 6 lessons, whatever you're doing. And then also, like, how do we plan out this particular training session? And so much of that, like, yes, there's the piece of like, how does this dog learn? But we really need to be thinking about the human side of it. And what does this human need out of training? And I think particularly if we're going to discuss, the potential differences between, how somebody in the sport world might raise their puppy versus what we might want to be doing with a pet dog, or as a professional with that client, the pet dog client, then I think a huge part of that is not just the dog, it's the human and the lifestyle. And what does that dictate as far as our training needs go and our goals go? Because there are a lot of things that we could do in a variety of different ways. And those different sort of approaches, those different methods, if you will, are going to produce different output. You might physically get the same behavior. If we're teaching something like a down, for instance, we might physically still get a down, but the how much arousal is in that down could vary. The dog's emotional state in that down could vary. There's just a lot of, or the expectation from the dog as far as what's going to happen after the down can vary. And so we just, we want to be thinking about, what does this client actually need? What is this person? What do I, as the dog's owner, what do I actually need from my dog? And is the training that I'm doing or the approach that I'm taking in alignment with those needs? And I think as professionals, that's really important to think about when we start working with a new client. Like your first, whether it's your consultation or your first lesson or both of those two things, but like those moments are so crucial in setting the tone for our training and setting our relationship with our clients and making sure we're going to get the kind of follow through, and that client feels like we're addressing their needs. And we might as trainers like things to look a certain way or to be a certain way, but it's not really about us at the end of the day. If you're a professional dog trainer, it's not about you. It's not about what you want from the dog. And so those are really important questions to answer.
No, that's true too. I mean, it's just like, because for me to just go explore all these different methods, because it's like, I work with like Heather Beck, and then like, of course, I worked with Bart and Jay Jack. It's like a huge menu that is like, you kind of have to like also just see what works with the owner too. And I think and
so here's an example, because you mentioned Bart now a couple times. I know you just did some work with him. So here's a perfect example. And what I want to really stress here is that this isn't about that. A lot of times we can have these different things, and it doesn't necessarily mean that one training style is contradicting another. So a perfect example of it is this. I haven't worked with Bart in several years, so I'm sure there's a lot about his training that has changed. But I remember last time that I spent some time with him, I spent a few days with him, a small group of people. This was before he was doing his formal schools and working on recalls specifically. And one thing that he was really stressing was that, a lot of people were waiting until their dog gets to them and then they would give their click or their verbal mark. So the dog kind of gets to them, slows down, comes to a stop, and that's when they're marking. And he was really emphasizing for what he does that he really likes to actually click. He was using a clicker when the dog was at its peak of speed, its peak intensity in the middle of the recall. That's when he was clicking. And he wasn't even worried about the finish at this point in his training. He was just having the dog go right through his legs and get the reward. But he was identifying when the dog was putting in maximum effort, when the dog was at its highest level of arousal. Okay. And that's exactly what he wanted from an output standpoint. And then you juxtapose that with another trainer that I'm a big fan of. So people are surprised about this because we have some ideological differences, but we've had some wonderful conversations, and I think she's a brilliant woman. Is a trainer named Emily Larlam. She's well known on YouTube under the handle Kiko Pup, and I think she's one of the most talented clicker trainers and reward-based trainers out there. And she does a lot of work of doing the opposite, of actually clicking and identifying when the dog is lowering arousal and capturing moments of low intensity and low arousal in her training. And it really shows. If you look at her dogs, if you watch her personal dogs, they're like super chill. Like they're really, it's like they look great. She's doing nice work. And that's what actually attracted me to her at first. I was like, man, like this woman's doing something different than a lot of the other clicker trainers I see, because her dogs look different. Like they're not anticipating, they're not in this high up state. And so you might look at that and saying like, oh, like those two trainers contradict each other, but they don't. What both of them are saying is that, hey, we can capture arousal states. We can condition the dog to degrees of arousal based on when and how we provide reinforcement. Perfectly in alignment with each other. Just one person says, hey, what I want right now is super high reinforcement. And the other person's saying, hey, what I want is super low reinforcement. But it's the same exact principle. We're just approaching it based on what does the human want. Emily doesn't want super hijacked. Bart would tell you, like, he likes his dogs to be a little bit, like he used to say, he likes his dogs to be hoodlums. Mm-hmm. He likes them to be a little bit like dominant, if you will. He wants them to try to push boundaries. That's what he wants in a dog for the sport that he's doing. It makes sense for him. There's nothing wrong with it for him. But if you train, and he'll be the first to admit this, that if you take your average pet dog owner and you apply some of his techniques, that it could be potentially dangerous. And he will be the first person to admit that. It's not anything that he would disagree with. And if you're not aware of that, again, the dog might respond. The dog might respond great to his techniques. The dog might learn from his techniques equally as well from Emily's techniques. But we have to look at the owner. What does this owner need? Now, if I'm the kind of dog trainer that I just think it looks great when dogs are like super flashy and jazzed up, but that's what I want, and that's not necessarily what the owner needs from their dog, then I may be doing them a disservice. So that's where I say it's not necessarily about it depends on the dog. Sometimes it's about it depends on the human. I think both those individuals are phenomenally talented trainers that anybody would do well to learn from. And they differ in so many ways, but the principle underlying their work is the same in that way, right? That thinking about your dog's arousal level when you provide reinforcement is important. And by the way, you know who else is really in line with that principle? Somebody like Cesar Millan, right? So, and again, some people might hate Cesar, but the principle is still there. And so you might go, well, but Cesar's way of teaching doesn't appeal to me. Well, okay, well, does Emily's, does Bart's, what appeals to you? And so trainers come to me, I work with a lot of professionals and they'll say, hey, like, I'm thinking about going to Bart's school. Would it be counterproductive for me? And I say, no, as long as you can take what you're learning and you can extract the principle and apply the principle to your needs. It doesn't matter that you're not a sport trainer or that you're not looking to compete, because the principles that he's teaching are sound and he's a phenomenal instructor.
Yeah. And I'm glad you pointed Cesar, because like my first, like when I first started dog training was like, it's probably just like any other young kid like that, like during that generation when Dog Whisperer was like on National Geographic and things like that. Like I got inspired like around 11 years old when I only had like a Shih Tzu, and you know, like I started like reading books like during all his books are in high school. Then I went to work with him at the DPC like during senior year, and then you know, it just going there opened the door to me as a dog trainer, because that's where I actually met Heather back at
Mhm.
like as an
Yeah, because
instructor,
she
which
used
is
to
really
help
cool.
instruct there. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, you know, just like being able to learn from all these different people, and then, you know, your view gets bigger, and then you start to see, you know, like some people aren't big fan of Caesar, and you know, it's just like for me, it's like I still do I still do a little bit of touching, and then I just do based on what I feel what the owner could do, but like also like what I like just so dependent on like the situation at hand, and it's such a unique topic to talk about. Like I like yeah, just depending on like the person that you're working with, the lifestyle, and also like what they need, because you know, like as much as everyone likes to see flashy dogs, but if like you know, you have just like this very like this parent of that has like family of two kids and things like that, that don't really want that kind of flashy obedience kind of dog. They just want a dog that doesn't want to pull on the walks or be reactive, lunge on leash, you know, then that's where um and I think also too, depending on I think it depends on like the owner's comfort level, right? Like
Mhm.
when it comes to like a correct like using like a correction or like a punishment per se, like you know, like how we like how what we would suggest, because you know, like most people look at like e-collars like bad at first, but then you know, like they look at us, they might view a squirt bottle a little bit different sometimes. Like it kind of does it kind of make sense on how like how
Mhm. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
um I think just I think it's I think definitely with that kind of thing is like even like one good example I was thinking about was like, you know, like for most of you and I, like we like to teach our dogs to either walk beside us or like neck or behind or working on walking behind us, just
Mhm.
so it's like low arousal, you know, it's just like, you know, they're in a more of a follower state of mind. um i've had I've heard some people where it's like, you know, with fearful dogs, you know, they walk them on like a longer, like on a long line a little bit more. Doesn't make them feel like restrained on the leash, but you know, it lets them explore and just
Mhm.
be more comfortable exploring and seeing that the world is not bad. So it's like for me, it's like, you know, if your dog's like super excited, if your dog's just like, you know, pulling, but it's not super fearful, I feel like, you know, sure, we can teach them to be like beside us or behind us, but maybe like if you had a more of a fearful dog, maybe just letting them be able to explore, even just like
Mhm.
just at least have a good association with being outside first before even implementing like the structure. What do you think about that? Like in like
Yeah, I
if
mean, I think like specifically like what I think about the idea of like having a less structured walk for a more fearful dog. Is that
yeah,
what?
yeah, just
Yeah.
like something like that with like I feel like that would be one of the exceptions that with like with most the training, where it's just like, you know, everyone wants the dog to be like beside them or
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I so first off, several years ago, I sort of transitioned away from teaching like a more traditional like heel position and started teaching dogs to just stay behind me. And I did that for a number of reasons. One of the things that I like about it, again, there's a variety of things here, but one of the things I like about it is that the way that I teach it and the way that I define it, there are different people might do it differently, um, is that it's a much lower criteria that I'm asking from the dog. So when I teach the dog to stay behind me, I'm giving them quite a bit of leash. They don't have to be like directly like 2 inches behind me. They could be 2 feet behind me. They could be 2 inches behind me. They could be 4 feet behind me. I don't care if they're on my left or my right. I kind of define it as like the wake of a boat, almost like this little triangle behind me that I sort of want them within. And it gives them a lot more flexibility to move around. They can sniff. They can like it's not that strict. Whereas a lot of traditional heel position is it's kind of this tight little box the dog has to stay in. Like if they fall too far back, they get corrected. If they go too far to one side, they get corrected. If they try to cross the other side, they get corrected. If they go too far forward, they get corrected. Like it's very strict. And in my opinion, kind of unnatural, which is why I was really wanting to move away from that. I was finding that when I would see dogs, even dogs that were doing it well, their gait often didn't look relaxed, especially if it was a higher energy dog. And so I liked that idea in general of having some structure to the walk, but not too much structure to the walk. And what I found was a lot less correction, like just way, way less correction involved. The dogs were accepting the position really easily. They were able to figure out the rules really quickly because again, it's only like one, it's just like, don't go in front. Like, doesn't really matter what you're doing back there. They're able to sniff, they're able to kind of be dogs in a more natural way. So there's that piece of it. That being said, a little bit more directly related to your question is very frequently in running a training center, we would get dogs in that were like super fearful, like particularly in like a board and train context. And I'm a huge fan of making sure that our board and trains are long enough that there's no real pressure for us to like get started with those dogs like on day one. So a lot of times the first couple of days, like we would open the dog's kennel and just let them walk out on their own. The center was designed so that we could do that. So they could get out to the potty yard without us having to put a leash on them or touch them. We kind of herd them back in their kennel, or we would just bring them in a room and just sort of hang out and not do anything. Like we would just check emails or whatever and just let the dog sort of exist around us. And then when the dog was ready to approach us and ready to essentially give us permission, like allow us to put a leash on them, we would often try to get them out for a walk because that's a great bonding experience. And in those early walks with a fearful dog, I don't do any kind of structure. Like I don't care. They could pull me, they could do whatever. I don't want there to be any sort of conflict in that walk. I just want us to do something enjoyable together. And if the dog doesn't know not to pull yet, I don't want to insert any of that tension into our relationship. So we're just out on a walk. We're just out enjoying the world. We're sniffing. I like doing something. I've heard Nelson Hodges do something similar to this, where like if I'm out in this context and the dog is showing interest in something, like there's a tree they're sniffing, right? Where I'll go up and sort of pretend I'm investigating that tree too, so that we have some shared interest. You know what I mean? It seems kind of silly, but the dogs see that, right? They go, oh, like you like trees too, or like, you know, the dog's sniffing sticks, and I pick up a stick and I give it to, oh, you like sticks too, right? And I want the dog. I just want to have those shared experiences with a fearful dog before I try to manipulate the dog's behavior in any way. I just want the dog to feel some form of connection to me, some way of relating to me. That's really natural. And I think it is really important to let some of those fearful dogs just have some time to just do whatever, but do it with you, and just create that little bit of connection first and let them decompress a little bit. And a lot of times you might spend the first 3-4 days of a training program like just doing that. But by the time you come through the other side of it and the dog feels comfortable and they're like, yeah, go ahead, put a leash on me. Yeah, totally. Like, show me what you want me to do. The rest of the training goes so exponentially faster compared to if you had forced the issue from the beginning. Not like physical forced the issue, but like even just like right out of the gate, trying to manipulate the dog with food luring, for instance, can still create a little bit of stress in the sense of there's a clear expectation being placed on the dog, and the dog's not ready for that yet. You know what I mean? And so it's like a psychological or like emotional or social type of pressure, where even if you're like holding a treat in your hand and trying to encourage the dog to come closer to you to get the treat, right? That's a pressure. It's like the free candy van. And it can make the dog feel a little bit uncomfortable. Like, again, we expect something of them. So I really like in early stages when working with very fearful dogs to remove all expectation. I don't expect anything from the dog. I want to show the dog who I am. I want to give the dog some reason to feel connected with me. And that's kind of my initial goal. And I want them to see that, like, I am reading them and I see that they are uncomfortable, and I will respect that and leave them the hell alone. That's what I want them to learn about me in those first few days, that I actually understand them. You know, that if they feel uncomfortable, I understand them. And that if they show interest in something, I'll try to show some interest in it too. Like, I'm trying I'm trying to make that connection. That's what works with kids. That's what works with other people. It's what works with dogs, right? So it's not, this isn't anything that's like rocket science. It's just about relationships and how we feel around each other at the end of the day.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, just like, yeah, just how you said it, right? With like the nervous dogs, more fearful dogs, like for you guys, it's just building that relationship and be able to, once you do have that relationship, now it's like, okay, now we can start doing little bits of work and like no, and like, yeah, expectation. Like I get a lot of clients with big expectations with dogs after like a consult or after like 4 lessons, and I just have to be like, like, hey guys, let's lower the criteria, like let's make sure that your dog can walk next to you first and be relaxed before we introduce like the triggers that your dog is reacted to, like dogs or people, like how some of us will just say, like while we're training your dog to not be reactive, like on walks and things like that, like don't take your dogs for as many walks, go do some other alternatives to drain some of the exercise, like for me, I just want to go with like one check mark at a time, just being able to just work on, basic foundations, or just things where it's like, like, hey, let's work on it where he's not pulling first, and then we can work on like maybe some of the exposure, like around the triggers, like later on, like kind of bit by bit, I feel. But but yeah, definitely I have clients that have little to high expectation that I have to like help drop down a little bit, just to make it feel like it make make them appreciate the smallest success, so those small success can create the bigger success like later on. um and yeah, fearful dogs, just I feel like there's always like small exceptions like that where you just have to approach it differently, versus like if you're dealing with like a puppy, or like just like your average happy-go-lucky dog.
Well, particularly with fear, right? Like we don't really get to determine the timeline when it comes to
Yep.
fear. You know what I
Yep.
mean? There's a
Yep.
lot of other things where we can push the timeline a little bit. We can say like, hey, like we've only got X amount of time to work with this client, so we need to, you know, definitely hit certain milestones on certain days and work at a certain pace. But you really can't do that when it comes to fear. You really have to, you can only work at the dog's pace when you're working with those types of situations.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and then like, on a different note, right? Like, when we do the long lines with the fearful dogs, we're doing it just to build a relationship and get them to be associated with the connection and things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I saw this video with Pat Stewart with when he was raising one of the puppies. Like he had the puppy like on a harness on a long line, and like for him, I think that was just like socialization, right? Where he was just getting the dog to be exposed to all these different sounds and people, things like that, especially if it's like working dog prospect. I feel like, and I could be wrong, but I wanted to get your thoughts about this, Tyler. Like when, like do the work, like I feel like some of the working dog people don't really care about the pulling on leash. I feel like I see most of them, like I've seen like just some TikToks, or I see some social media where it's like, they don't really worry so much about like having them walk next to them. It's more just like, just, hey, just them going around, like just being dogs, like just exploring and things. Like if you know what I mean, but otherwise I'll
I
try
know
to
what you mean.
explain it.
No, no,
Yeah.
I know what you mean. I mean, I think so. Obviously, like I can't speak for anybody else, and there
Yeah.
are in the working dog world, you're going to get so many different personalities and types of things. I think there are a lot of people in the working dog world who, um, for whatever reason, like leash walking just may not be a thing they do with their dog, right? And this could be for a
Hmm.
variety of reasons. It could be that, again, a lot of them, their dogs are getting a lot of exercise and stimulation and enrichment through training the exercises that they're doing. So they just don't, there's not really like, they don't need to walk their dog that much.
Right.
And so it's just not a high priority in their training plan. And because of that, and how infrequently they might be taking their dog places on extended walks on leash, they just can tolerate, like they have no problem tolerating, pulling. It's just not a big deal for them. That's totally fine and acceptable. I mean, there are a lot of people in the working dog world, particularly whose dogs don't even live in their house. They live in outdoor kennels, and again, they get lots of exercise and enrichment and love, and they have wonderful lives, right? But they're not house dogs, so they don't learn to behave and learn to do a lot of things that we would expect our house dogs to do, and that's okay. I think there are other people in the working dog world who probably do take their dogs on lots of walks and really do want to teach them to walk nice on leash. There's also people, again, I don't know if this is still true of Bart, but for a long time, he would do his focused heel on his left-hand side, like his competitive heeling. And on his right-hand side, he would teach the dog to do like a very flat, like low arousal walk, where he did, I don't think he cared much if it was like, pulling a little bit, like it didn't have to be like a perfectly slack leash or maybe all of the same standards or criteria that we might teach as pet dog owners, but he definitely wanted the dog to walk in like a calmer, more controlled way. And his primary reasoning at the time, at least, was that when he's leading his dog from his vehicle to the training field, especially on competition day, he doesn't want the dog burning energy until it gets to the field. He wants to conserve all of that dog's energy for its performance. And so he teaches, hey, when you're on my right and I put the leash in this way and I walk in this way, that you got to be calm, you got to be chill. And so there are a variety of different reasons that people may or may not teach leash walking, right? I have clients that they live on acreage and they just don't walk their dog on leash very much. And so, again, does it make sense for us? Like, this is another thing where I think, again, thinking about the human, right? And as a professional dog trainer, this is super important. So this is a slight digression, but it's a little bit related here. And for anybody who's a professional trainer, this is really worth paying attention to. Where, okay, normally as dog trainers, let's say somebody comes to us and they want obedience training, right? So normally as dog trainers, most of us, we have like our 5 big ones. We've got our come, heel, sit, down, place. Like that's what I would say the average dog trainer teaches. There's going to be some variation there. But those 5 commands, right? Well, I know a lot of dog trainers that, I work with. And in fact, I just worked with a team of dog trainers that this was the case. Like pretty much every dog that came through their board and train, like, yeah, they might adjust the training a little bit here and there per dog, but pretty much all the dogs, regardless of behavior problem, they all learned the same obedience. The same amount of time was spent on each obedience command. Like it was pretty much the same training program clear across the board. But this can be problematic in a lot of ways. And sometimes it's problematic for us as dog trainers and we don't even know it. Because here's the deal. Let's say you get a client that comes to you, they say, I want obedience training with my dog. Well, if we can spend just a little bit of time talking to that client and learning about their lifestyle, and we find out something like they live on acreage and they don't really need to leash walk their dog, and we go, okay, so like in the course of this training program, we're just not really going to worry about leash walking that much, okay? A couple things can happen. So not only maybe they don't need leash walking, but maybe because they live on that acreage, maybe they've got trails, maybe they really like taking their dog off leash. And so recall is super important to them. Now, normally if we have 5 commands and we spend equal amount of time on them, so we take our 100% of our time and we divide it in 5, that means 20% of our time spent on each of those commands, correct? Mm-hmm. Well, what happens if we just take away one of them? We just say, we're not going to do leash walking. If we still split our time equally, now, instead of 20% of our time on each of those commands, we're spending 25% on each one of those commands. That doesn't sound like much, but 5 divided by 20 is 4. It's a 25% increase of our time spent on each of those commands. 25% increase is significant. If you had a 25% increase on your net revenue at the end of the year, you'd be jumping like hurrah, right? Mm-hmm. But let's take that one step further and say, what if we took all that time from leash walking and we threw it onto our recall? Mm-hmm. We now have instead of spending 20% of our time on recall, we're spending 40% of the time on recall and still 20% of the time on each of the other things. We just had a 100% increase in the amount of time to spend on the thing that actually matters most to the client and not wasting our time on the thing that doesn't matter to them. What do we get at the end? We get a happier client. We get the same amount of money. We get less work for ourselves, and we get a better result. Right? So yeah, if a sport dog trainer like wants to let their dog pull on leash because for their lifestyle, like it's just not a thing for them, like cool. Like
Right. Right.
it doesn't, whatever, and I think this is really worth thinking about as professional dog trainers. I think our lives with dogs have changed. So much of what is taught to professional dog trainers in the dog training schools, in the online programs, it's fundamentally very similar to what's been going on since like the 80s, right? The way we live with dogs is vastly different from the way that we lived with dogs 20 years ago and 30 years ago and 40 years ago. And I think we need to rethink this a little bit. Do all 5 of these commands always matter? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And not only when we think about it in the sense of like, what commands do we spend time on? But here's something else that I think a lot. Like you mentioned, for instance, some clients may not be as comfortable with correction as other clients, right? Well, me personally, a huge focus of a big part of my career has been, how do we reduce our use of pressure while still giving very effective dog training? So way back in the day, I was revisiting the way to use prong collars. This was kind of how I initially kind of became famous, if for lack of a better term, on like a national and international level. Was at the time, like people were still using prong collars in a pretty like rough cut kind of way. And we started really playing around with, hey, how can we be more gentle with this tool? And how can we use it in a more subtle and nuanced way while still being highly effective? And nobody was doing this at the time. Well, almost nobody, to be fair. My longtime friend, Chad Mackin, was like the other sort of big player in this space at the time. And he and I were communicating a lot and doing a lot of kind of parallel work that complemented each other very well. Later on, I did a lot of work with e-collars. Later on, I did a lot of work with rethinking the use of punishment and how we can use punishment more effectively. And one of the things that I think a lot about now is, even if we take these 5 commands, right, and we say, hey, we don't, like using correction, like putting pressure on dogs isn't like comfortable for anybody, right? But why, as dog trainers, do we always feel that all 5 of those commands are worth putting the same amount of pressure on, right? So it might be worth having a discussion with our clients and saying, hey, like, which commands are like the dog must do it, and which commands are like it would be nice if the dog did it. And if a client's uncomfortable, for instance, with the use of an e-collar, but they might say, you know what, but like recall is super important to me. But maybe that client, like, they don't care that much about a downstay, or they don't really need the downstay that much. And we go, okay, well, what if we just focus the e-collar around the recall, and then maybe like a little bit of place command, but like, don't worry about enforcing your downstay with the recall and your sit stay with the recall and your leash walking, because you don't walk your dog that much. And so we can still teach those things, but we're going to teach it with a different expectation and a different sort of criteria for the dog. And right there, we have reduced very significantly the amount of pressure used in our training, right? There's no rule book that says that if you use an e-collar, you have to use it equally with every single thing you teach your dog. There's no rule that dictates that, right? But as dog trainers, traditionally, that's what we've always done. If we are going to teach somebody e-collar, we teach it on all the behaviors and equally, and we expect the same level of compliance with all behaviors. But what if that level of compliance just doesn't matter to that owner that much on some of those things? And you know what else happens when you tailor the training in this way? You get way better owner compliance. Way better owner compliance. Because you're actually doing things that matter to them. You know what I mean? So we feel better about our training. We're using less pressure. Again, we can put our time more into the things that matter most and get a better result there. And we can get way better compliance from the owner because the training is now more truly tailored to their needs instead of just dictated by what has always been done in the dog training industry. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so these are the kinds
Yeah.
of exceptions that I think are really interesting these days to look at, is like exceptions from the dog training norms and the things that I think a lot of dog trainers have really been indoctrinated with a lot of myths and a lot of habits that aren't necessarily true and aren't necessarily the best habits for our modern lives with dogs.
Right.
If that makes sense. And so that's a lot of what I do in my work with trainers is I like to get them, it's not even about methodology, right? Like some trainers do have methodology questions and I'm certainly happy to help people on that. But a lot of times it's process and it's about the way that we're thinking about our training, the way that we're approaching the problem that's presented to us by the client and how we design our training plan and how we break down our training sessions in such a way that it's really effective, really efficient, minimizes the amount of labor on us, maximizes the happiness of the client, right? And also minimizes the pressure put on the dog. And a lot of that has nothing to do with whatever your choice of methods is. I don't care if you're a clicker trainer or an e-collar trainer or a prong, you use prong collars or halties, or it doesn't matter. Like the methods like obviously like there's a certain amount of technical skill that matters in dog trainer, but most of the dog trainers that come to me, like their technique is okay. Like it's fine. There's always cleaning up to do. But it's the process stuff. It's the process stuff that they're missing, and they're not thinking about their training in the right way. They're not approaching, especially when it comes to behavior problems. They're not approaching it in the right way. So they've got all the techniques they need. They just aren't applying them. They're not deploying the skills they have in a very effective way. If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it does, and I think I would definitely love to hear like the habits that you've seen or heard that definitely would love to elaborate on that. But I mean for me, like for like how I use it with my Malinois when it comes to like using the e-collar for like different commands, it's just, I think this is like also going back to a little bit of the working dogs, how they always want to use the e-collar for all the commands. It's just because they want like the speed, they want the whole they want that flashiness per se, whereas like when I teach my clients, it's like it's just more when I use an e-collar just for recall or off leash stuff. And like I don't want to, if that's all they want, then it's like I don't really put the pressure on using that e-collar for every single command that they taught. And they like it, they enjoy the opportunity to have that freedom with their dogs, like
Most people that learn how to use an e-collar, they love it. I was just right before this, I was on a Zoom with one of my professional clients, and we were talking about when clients want like every client, when you start them on an e-collar, every dog owner's one of their first question is like, am I going to need this thing forever, or am I going to have to keep this on my dog for his whole life, or when can I take this off, right? And there's a couple of different things I say in response to that. But one of the things I always tell people is like, listen, like, I know you care about that right now, but by the time we're done with training, like you're not going to be concerned with that. Like, I'm probably going to have to pry that remote out of your cold, dead hands, because most people, once they learn the e-collar, like the peace of mind and the security that it gives them and the freedom that it gives their dog, like the last thing in the world they want to do is get rid of that tool. There are other pieces of the puzzle when it comes to, like fading out the use of the collar and whatnot. But in general, that's what we find, is that most of the clients that we teach how to use an e-collar, like they fall in love with those things. It's just the nature of it, right? People want to give their dogs freedom, and they want peace of mind and security. I know for me, like, once I was comfortable with e-collars, I became very uncomfortable ever having my dog off leash without one on. Like, you just become so used to that sense of security.
Yeah. And I mean, also, I'm sure, and there's always just like, some percentage of life shit happens, and all of a sudden, it's like you're going out with your dog, and then next thing you know, you see a deer run across the park, and then you're just like, oh crap.
And no dog's 100%. I mean, you could talk to people like Bart, who's a multi-world champion in Belgian ring, or people like Ivan Balabanov, who's one of the most decorated dog trainers in America. I mean, these are some of the top guys out there when it comes to obedience. Michael Ellis, and not one of them has ever owned a dog that's 100% obedient. And these guys are the best of the best trainers with the best of the best genetics in their dogs. and not one of them would ever say that any of their dogs were 100%, right?
Yep.
So it's
Yep.
like, so that's kind of what I always tell people is, when it comes to going without the collar, I say, you'll get to a point where in a controlled environment that's enclosed and safe, like you definitely won't need your e-collar. But I recommend that for the life of the dog, if you're ever in an unenclosed environment with your dog off leash, I recommend having the e-collar on. No different than if you live in a state that does not have a law that requires wearing a helmet on a motorcycle, I would still recommend you wear a helmet. I don't care how good of a driver you are. It's the same thing, right? It's just a safety thing. It's a liability thing. So why wouldn't you?
Right. And this kind of just made me think, like me having my Malinois, she kind of was just like my guinea pig when it came to just like the methods and just like how I practice everything. And I feel like I feel like sometimes our personal dogs as dog trainers take a lot of pressure
There are lab
experimenting,
rats.
Yeah, lab
there are
rats.
lab rats. Yeah, we have to be very appreciative to them for that.
Yeah, and I definitely do, but definitely just like sometimes like sometimes my dog might get confused on what I'm doing sometimes because like I might do a lot of fun stuff, exciting stuff, but then like on a walk she gets a little too worked up, and me trying to do the follow, it's like stay behind or just walk. I think also too, like honestly, it just like how you keep saying, it really depends on the person's preference. It's like if some of my trainer friends don't care about pulling on the leash, is kind of like cool. I think it's just it's just like the lifestyle and the preference. I'm still trying to figure out like what my preference is between like, do I want my dogs to walk behind me or if I care about them pulling, because sometimes I'll go back and forth, but I'm trying to, me being a trainer, I want to make sure I want to be clear with my dogs at that point.
Clear expectations, 100%.
Let me just see the comments real quick. Hey Cash, hey Jen, hey Daniel, hey Heather. Oh, Bart just commented. He just said yes, ... but, which I don't know.
Bart, I miss you, man. I haven't talked to you in a long time, Bart.
Yeah, it'd be cool to see you guys together. That'd be awesome. So Tyler, I know you were just mentioning ago, like there was like certain habits that now you feel like doesn't click with the modern way how we work with dogs. Like what were those habits that you were thinking about? Or do you have like are there like the top habits that you see that most trainers you encounter?
Well, I think, the big one that I see a lot is kind of what I already mentioned, right? This
Okay.
habit of like, every like obedience always means these same 5 commands for every dog and sort of spending equal time on them. Like I just don't think that really necessarily makes sense for a lot of dog owners today. And so we just need to kind of rethink that a little bit. That's kind of the big one. You know, I think this is a little bit of a different subject, but I think the idea or the use of punishment in general has been sort of problematic in the industry in the past. And what I mean by that is I have a certain amount of like inside knowledge of like what is being taught at a lot of the big dog training schools around. And I'll be perfectly frank here. This might not be the most I don't know, some people might not like this, but most of the big dog training schools were doing a really, really crappy job of teaching people about punishment and even negative reinforcement. So they were teaching techniques that sort of in a rough kind of way were using these things, right? There's a lot of like yanking and cranking going on. But the actual like technical understanding of what makes reinforcement work and what makes it not work, negative reinforcement, or what makes positive punishment work or not work, was sort of missed. Like there wasn't a real academic approach to these things in that sense, even though the science was out there. And so what you were getting is a lot of like, honestly, just like really shitty dog training. Like I had so one of my longtime students, I'm not going to mention his name, but when I first met him, he came to one of my seminars, and what he said to me was he was at one of these schools. I'm not going to say which one. And he was already not feeling super comfortable with like the techniques they were showing him. This was one of the big name, like major schools. And then he was on YouTube one night while he was at the school, and he saw one of my videos about how to use a prong collar, how I use prong collars. And he said the very next day he dropped out of the school because he was already feeling like this can't be the only way to do it. And then he saw my video and he dropped out, and he enrolled in the next seminar of mine he saw. We've been good friends ever since. And again, it's just they're teaching people to use tools in a way that sort of resembles negative reinforcement and punishment, but it's such a crude and sloppy way of going about it. And so because of that, some of these schools wouldn't even say that what they were doing is punishment, because that word had become so taboo that if you even mentioned the use of punishment, even balance trainers didn't like to say they were using punishment for many, many years, because you would just be villainized for it. So they would come up with all kinds of different ways of describing what they were doing. And because of that, none of them were not, I won't say none of them, a lot of them were not actually learning really about punishment, how to do it well, because everybody was sort of, and this was me too, by the way, back in the day. And so we kind of had this habit of avoiding punishment sort of outwardly, even though we were doing things that were punishment, just kind of done in a really poor way. Right. And so I think like that's something right out of the gate that like industry wide, like, listen, like punishment's really important. Like it's part of learning. It's part of the world. It's part of the environment. And we need to understand like what makes it tick and when it's appropriate to use and when it's not appropriate to use. And if you're going to use it, like we need to understand how to use it in a way that's really effective and minimizes its use in both frequency and intensity, because we're using it in a very, very well thought out and calculated way. And that just hasn't been the case in the past 30 years. And it's something that I think needs to be explored a lot more. It's something that I spend a lot of time on with my students, because when you understand it properly, it can not only add so much to the results you're getting with the dogs that you're training, but again, it really ends up reducing the amount of overall pressure in the training program versus when you're trying to avoid using punishment just because of some weird like dogmatic belief, which is based on the fact that people just weren't using it properly. Right. Like it'd be like, you know, just because you're yanking on a leash doesn't mean you're using punishment any more. That just because you're shoving treats in a dog's mouth doesn't mean you're using positive reinforcement. You know what I mean? It's the same idea. So, you know, I think punishment has a place, and I think it can be done in a really, really careful and well thought out and compassionate way that really benefits the dog's well-being overall and improves their ability to kind of live successfully in a human world. Just as I feel like, you know, discipline is important with children, right? But it's got to be done in a well thought out way. Like we don't just want to like lose our cool, and, you know, it's the same thing with dogs, you know. I think we need to rethink, you know, another habit is, again, just the tools. Like one thing that I spend a lot of time on is getting people to think outside of the box. This is something that, hey, Bart, if you're still listening, man, this was a huge influence from Bart. First time I ever saw Bart, this dude, it was his first time back in the States in like 10 years or something. He came with this like duffel bag of all these weird contraptions he had made for training dogs. I mean, totally, he was like MacGyver, like totally outside of the box. Every problem that somebody had with a dog, mostly around sport type work, but he had some weird contraption he had devised of how to fix it. And it was a more efficient solution than if he had just stuck to the same traditional dog training tools. And I think in the pet dog world, we see this a lot, where people are so married in the balance training community. People are so married that correction has to come from like the prong collar or the e-collar or the slip lead, instead of saying, but what does this dog respond to in a way that gives me the reaction that I actually need right now? And it might not be one of those tools. It might be something that's not even considered a dog training tool, you know? And I don't want to go super deep into examples of that right now, but again, just thinking a little bit outside the box when we're training dogs, especially when it comes to the use of correction, that you're not limited to like just the things that are sold in dog training, by dog training suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, there's just a lot. There's a lot there, honestly. There's
Yeah.
a lot that I get into with my clients. It's like, again, so much of it is just process. It's not even technique. Again, some people do need to have technique cleaned up. Like we do see that, but a lot of my clients have really good technique. They just need to learn to think about their process a little bit differently. And the difference in the outcomes, the results, it's just exponential. It's exponential when you can just think about the problem in the right way and organize your training in a more efficient way. I think that's like a huge thing that I would say can be like a big takeaway. Again, people that have worked for me in the past, a lot of the trainers that spent a lot of time training with me, if you were to, ask them one thing, they would tell you that would happen a lot, right? They'd be in the training room working a dog, and I'll come in, and the first thing out of my mouth is going to be, "What's your goal right now with this dog?"
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think just that concept of having a clear goal. And what we want to know is, we want to have a clear goal for the overall plan, like with that client. Like, what does that client actually need? Are we actually organizing our training in a way that is prioritizing the client needs instead of just generically kind of blanketing all of our dog training stuff? But also in that particular session. So what I see a lot is dog trainers bring dogs out and they just start working them, and they'll be like working on place, for instance, doing place command. And if I were to walk into the room and ask my trainers what their goal is, and they were to say, "Oh, I'm working on place," I would say, "Yeah, but what's your goal?" Because there's so many different things, right? What do you expect to improve as a result of what you're doing right now? What are you looking for to know that the training you're doing is actually productive? Every session you spend with the dog should be productive if you're a professional dog trainer, right? And so if you just say, "I'm working on place," what does that mean, right? Are you trying to get the dog to have a better response to your verbal cue? Are you trying to get them to send from greater distances? Are you generalizing to new environments or new surfaces or different types of places? Are you working on duration? Are you building distraction? I mean, there's so many different things you could be working on. And if you don't know, then you don't even know if what you're doing in that session is making any difference, or if you're just going through the motions with the dog and not even making progress. And so many of the people that I work with, we can speed up the progress that they're making, again, really exponentially, by teaching them how to clarify their goals and then make sure that what they're doing in their training is actually in alignment with those goals. Because sometimes it turns out that what they're doing isn't even in alignment with what they want as an outcome, because they didn't take the time to actually articulate what that outcome should be or what the goal is. What are you actually looking for? How are you measuring the success of your training to even know if this session was productive or not, or to know if over the next 2 or 3 sessions you're seeing progress, or if you need to adjust, right? And again, it's not methodology dependent, right?
Mm-hmm.
I always say, like whether, like I have a course on e-collar training. The way I teach e-collar might be slightly different from the way that Bart teaches it, or slightly different from the way that Ivan teaches it, or Michael Ellis teaches it, or Duke Ferguson,
Mm-hmm.
or any of these other guys. But at the core, when the different approaches work, they're working based on the same principles of animal learning, right? One thing, again, because I know Bart's here, one thing in that same first seminar I ever went to with Bart, he said to the audience, he said, there's nothing new in dog training in the past 50 years. Which was sort of a weird thing to hear Bart say, because he was literally like one of the most innovative people I'd ever seen in the world. But what I believe he was getting at is that, again, it's the same principles. You can come up with new and creative ways of applying those principles, but the principles don't change, right? Animals learn because of how animals learn, and that hasn't changed essentially since the dawn of time.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Anyway, that was a bit of a digression, but
It's
that's the
okay.
kind of stuff that I'm thinking about when I'm talking about like just some of these habits that I see trainers have, and some of these patterns that we need to sort of get them out of, and
Yeah.
reshape
Yeah.
the way they're thinking, and get them to make more progress.
Yeah. No, I mean, I loved it. It's I feel like sometimes it's just a nice reminder for us trainers, especially, just like talk about like what's the goals. And like for me, doing 5 years of this, me finally understanding like a good meaning definition between like punishment and negative reinforcement. Like when I went to Bart, it was drilled in my head doing, like quizzes and tests and stuff that is like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Now I have
He
the
ain't gonna let
idea.
you miss it. That's for damn sure. Bart's not gonna let you miss it. He's not gonna give you
Nope.
that certificate if you don't understand it.
Nope. I passed it with just barely a 90. So it was,
Yeah.
I was very glad with that. So,
But it's the same thing, right? Like I spent all this time with Bart, and like sure I learned techniques and stuff. But again, if you hear this stuff that's like really sticking in my brain, it's not the little methodology things, right?
mhm,
My time with Bart, he shaped the way I think a lot of the way I think
mhm,
about dog training, and that's what I hope to do with my students as well. I mean, there's all these little things from him that really had more to do with how I'm approaching the problem and how I'm thinking about the problem. And I think that's so much of what dog trainers need. Again, the technical aspect, the methodology is super important, but if you don't know how to think about the problem, if you don't know how to set goals and then design your training plan to make sure it's in alignment with those goals, there's not a dog training technique in the world that's going to save you. You know?
right, right. No, it was no, that was all super insightful. And I know I didn't get to say this, guys, but you guys could either post questions now or like later on. We'll probably like after it ends, we can probably just reply to the comment like after that. But yeah, no, it's really insightful, and I feel like it's just like a topic that isn't usually mentioned a lot, and it's like of all people, I'm glad I got to do this talk with you, Tyler, because it's just like it's an interesting topic to talk to. And then I always was like thinking what would be a cool topic to talk to Tyler Muto about and things like that. And it's just really insightful, especially since you are working with trainers like
Yeah.
a lot more when it comes to like coaching and things.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
and it's basically all like I don't really work with like I don't really do pet dog training anymore. I work with trainers who are working with pet dogs, but my time is spent with the trainer. Even like the video you referenced earlier on Consider the Dog with Olaf the German Shepherd, right? Like
mhm,
that was not a client of mine. It was a trainer who was a client of mine, and I was helping the trainer train the dog. She was working with the dog every day throughout a 4-week board and train. I was meeting with her 2 to 3 times a week.
mhm. That if you guys listening have not seen that yet, it's really cool to watch. I think it was on episode 7, right? I think that the latest one.
Yeah, I think latest was episode 7. Yeah, we're almost. I think there's only like 2 more episodes coming out. It's long. I mean, we filmed basically all the time I spent with them. And Jake, who does my media work, has just put in a tremendous amount of work to kind of take hours upon hours upon hours of raw footage and turn it into something like very digestible. So yeah, it's an interesting series, a very challenging dog, and a very
Mhm,
challenging case also because of the family was
mhm,
not the right dog for the family, and so is sort of making the best of a crappy situation. At the
mhm.
end of the day.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I know my hour's up, but Tyler,
Yeah, I,
for
I can go overtime a little bit. By the way, I don't have like my schedule's clear after this. Actually, usually I pick my daughter up from school, but my van's in the shop today, so I don't even have to do that. So we can go
ah
overtime.
okay,
I
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, you guys, I mean, anyone got questions? Anyone want to say anything? Because I know this topic isn't like the stuff like how I've done before, like dog reactivity or things like that. But I just figured it'd be something that it's kind of like good brain food, or like just something to just think about when it comes to like training or you working with a trainer. So let me think. Trying to think what other thing. But no, I honestly think we
We're
went through
good.
all that, and
Cool.
it was really smooth. And I want to and thank you again, Tyler. I really appreciate taking time, giving me your time, and having this discussion, because the only time I met you was like Florida, and I was just this start the first time IACP member just starting out, and I'm like celebrity like fanboying about you.
Yeah, which is
That's
always funny. Like I don't kind of see myself in that way. Like I'm just a dude who trains dogs, but it's flattering. Thank you.
Yeah, it's like I'm hoping, later on I can do some online sessions with you and just talk either about refining my training or, and maybe help me with a little bit of a business talk. So it's definitely going to be something on my definitely going to be something on my to do list later in the year. So, but yeah, for people interested to learn about you or learn about your coaching, like what are the best ways to reach out to
Yeah,
you
so
or
it's
go to
a,
you?
a
So
few a few things. So when it comes to like behavior stuff, um, Consider the Dog is my website. It's not just me. We have like 9 instructors or so that work with me on there. Literally hundreds of hours of video content, and different trainers that do things in different ways. But like probably even just hundreds of hours of my own content in addition to everybody else's. So all of my like up to date instructional videos on behavior are hosted on considerthedog.com. It's a great website. It's a very low monthly membership. I think it's the best deal in dog training today. Along with the videos, we have a private Facebook group that I'm very active on, as well as we do twice monthly live streams with our instructors where people can ask questions and stuff like that. And then when it comes to coaching professionals, tylermuto.com is my website that sort of hosts all of that. I do a few things. So the kind of most common thing is working one-on-one with people. We do a lot of Zoom sessions. People send me video in between our sessions, or if we're working on behavior stuff or case studies. But we're also sometimes working on websites and expansion and financial planning and all kinds of weird stuff like that. So we do that. We have a community forum. So for people who maybe aren't ready totally to go full blast into one-on-ones, we have a really nice community. It's called the Inner Circle. It's professionals only, so we can discuss things that we maybe might not be comfortable discussing if there are, just dog owners there, like some of our dealing with clients and marketing and the money end of things and stuff like that. And it's a really nice platform. It's broken into different topics, so the conversations are very organized, and it's a little bit of a lower threshold of entry when it comes to cost as well. Most of my one-on-one packages do include also membership into that forum as well. And then on occasion, I do travel out and actually work with people on location. So I was just recently working with a team of trainers in Detroit. I was there for 4 days at a facility that does primarily board and trains, and working with their staff on sharpening up their training skills, and then also meeting with the owners after hours to discuss business type things and stuff like that. So I do that as well. And so, yeah, tylermuto.com is like all of that. Whereas again, like if you're just interested in behavior and want to watch some really cool online courses, we've got courses on everything from, we've got one of our instructors, Sarah Brewski, that teaches like scent and disc dog stuff and things like that, all the way through like, I've got courses on reactivity and resource guarding and counter conditioning, and course on how I teach dogs to walk behind me, which is really cool, very popular course. I got a really in-depth e-collar course, so lots of stuff on there, and that's definitely worth checking out as well.
yeah, no, definitely, man. Me being a subscriber on Consider a Dog is really good content. Definitely recommended. And yeah, thank you all of you guys. Thank you, Bart, for listening in and commenting. And yeah, I think I'm gonna wrap it up here. And I hope everyone has a great Monday. And I'll keep you guys posted on the next live we do. So everyone have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.